In a significant development, US President Donald Trump held a crucial phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, signaling a potential shift in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Following the call, Putin stated that both sides are prepared to negotiate a ceasefire and work on a future peace agreement. However, the Russian president emphasized that progress will take time. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed concern, warning that Russia is merely stalling to prolong the war. He stressed the need for realistic peace proposals and a genuine commitment to ceasefire talks. European Union has agreed to impose tighter sanctions on Russia, aiming to force Moscow into peace negotiations. Similarly, the UK is set to introduce new measures to increase pressure on Russia. In response to these sanctions, Russia says Kyiv must decide on next steps towards peace. Moscow claims Europe failed to block talks, stresses it won't respond to ultimatums as EU tightens sanctions. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says Moscow is ready for talks, but Kyiv must decide. She accuses Ukraine of irrationality, adding she hopes its leadership acts to preserve what's left of their statehood amid mounting war pressure. As peace talks continue, the road to resolution remains uncertain, with both sides holding firm on key issues. We have Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations at Macalester College and Senior Fellow from Minnesota, United States, joining us today. Thank you for joining us. Is Trump positioning himself as a parallel peacemaker ahead of the elections, and how might this undermine official U.S. policy?
Trump would like to position himself as a recipient of the Nobel Prize, but that's not going to happen because at this moment, the two sides, Ukraine and Russia, have irreconcilable differences, and President Putin has no interest in striking a deal because he's winning on the battlefield incrementally. He's getting what he wants. And so what the incentive structure doesn't exist for him to come to the negotiating table. And so what I see happening is President Trump washing his hands of this ultimately because he realizes he's not going to accomplish what he thought he would within 24 hours, famously, and he's going to have to look for his Nobel Prize elsewhere.
And is Zelensky's pushback a signal that Ukraine no longer trusts third-party mediation, including that from Washington?
Yeah, I mean, President Zelensky desperately wants a ceasefire and some kind of permanent peace negotiation, although because Ukraine's losing the war. So of course he's incentivized to have some kind of ceasefire, maritime, air, drone, battlefield, whatever. And I think ever since the debacle in the Oval Office a few months back, how could he possibly trust President Trump? Even though Trump, I think, has adjusted his posture he's a little more critical now of Putin and the Russians. But still, if I were the president of Ukraine, I wouldn't trust Trump.
And if ceasefire talks advance without clear security guarantees for Ukraine, could that set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts?
No, because part of the reason for this war is the expansion of NATO ever closer to Russia's borders. It's not the only reason, but it's a part of the equation. And the thought of stationing British and French troops in Ukraine as a kind of backstop for some kind of negotiated ceasefire/peace agreement, the Russians will never, ever, ever accept that. In fact, it would just be a further provocation. That's not going to work, and I'm not really sure why Paris and London are even talking in these terms, because surely they must know it's utterly counterproductive.
Thank you, Professor Andrew Latham, for joining us. As we move on to our next story,